Today on Locked on Rockies, continuing to go around the infield, we've ended up at first base. What is the state of the position of first base for the Colorado Rockies? It's really interesting what the Rockies are going to do at first base. How long will CJ Cron start every day there? Will he be the number one guaranteed first baseman throughout the 2023 season? We'll talk about that and a whole lot more. Today's episode of Locked on Rockies.
You are Locked on Rockies, your daily Colorado Rockies podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rock on Rockies fans, welcome into the Locked on Rockies podcast for today, the 23rd day of February in the year 2023. I am your host of the Locked on Rockies podcast, Paul Holden, bringing you your daily Colorado Rockies podcast right here on the Locked on Podcast Network, where you can find your team every single day. And if your team is the Colorado Rockies, well, you're in the right spot, because that's what we do around here, is we talk about the Rockies each and every single day. And you can get the show first. You can get the show live. You can be part of the live chat on the Locked on Rockies YouTube channel. Just to find Locked on Rockies on YouTube. You can hit that subscribe button. It makes it a lot more helpful for a guy like me. And again, we're also free and streaming on your favorite streaming service. And again, thank you for making us your first listen of the day. State of the position, we've been going around the infield, going around the diamond, talking about the Rockies here and first base. And the Rockies, again, you're sitting here and you're saying, well, the Rockies have an obvious choice. They have an obvious answer. CJ Cron will start for the Colorado Rockies. He will be the primary first baseman to start the season for the Colorado Rockies. But CJ Cron is on the team mostly for his offense. I mean, and he played a good enough first base, and he filled his time. I mean, CJ Cron has taken full advantage of his time in Colorado with the Rockies, and he's been productive when he has done so. 2 seasons now with the Rockies, and this is both times where he has been someone that has contributed mightily to the run generation. Nearly 30 home runs in back-to-back seasons for Cron with the Rockies. 29 home runs in 2022, 28 home runs in 2021. He picked up 132 hits in 2021, 148 hits last year. He was also an all-star for the first time in his career. So this makes sense. I mean, this is an easier option and something where the Rockies for sure will start with, because CJ Cron launched the ball out of the yard last year. He was very efficient of hitting home runs, especially in the first half of the season, and went on some stretches. But that's the thing, especially when it comes to first base, he's better at DH at this point. At this point, CJ Cron's best options for, the best way for CJ Cron to be in the lineup is to be a DH, because first base really should be another spot where you get these players on the field, especially with the fact that you have two of your main prospects being there, and one of them is supposed to be your big first baseman, the first baseman of the future. Luxay says McMahon can also play first base, but he didn't like it. McMahon won't be playing any first base this year. I can tell you that. Why is CJ Cron poised to be more in line to do some DHing? It's just because Montero and Toglia are going to be the best options for you to have at first base. And they are getting a lot of work over there. Montero especially is going to be someone that I think you're going to see play more first base than you might expect. Some people might expect him to just be getting most of his time at third base. I don't think so. I think you're going to see Montero get in there and play more at first base as well. And yes, that will mean more Charlie Blackmon in right field. But to start the season, for the beginning of the season, we've talked about this, the Rockies have to deal with the Randal Grichuk injury. And because of the Randal Grichuk injury, that means the Rockies are going to have to use Charlie Blackmon in the outfield at least more than we thought, or maybe we anticipated, to start the season. Charlie Blackmon is going to play more in the field due to the Grichuk injury, and this is going to therefore make first base a little bit more clogged to start the season, and where you need to make sure that you're using Cron effectively, because you need him to be in the lineup, because he is your, outside of Bryant, hopefully, CJ Cron is your power bat. He is the one option the Rockies truly look for when you're looking for the Rockies slugger, for the guy that's supposed to come out and hit the ball long and far. It is CJ Cron. That is his role for the Rockies. You're going to have to keep his bat in the lineup as much as possible. This is a first base is just another example of the Rockies. It's just like the outfield, where you got the log jam. How are you? What truly is your motive and motivation for CJ Cron? If CJ Cron is doing well, CJ Cron also, I believe, signed that extension. Let's see where I think he's under contract. Let's see. 2-year, $14.5 million deal. And so he will be a free agent after this season. He signed that extension. He's with the Rockies. He's free agent in 2024. So again, the perfect formula for Cron is to get him to be close to an all-star, have him hit 15, 20. If he hits 15, 20 home runs in the first half of the season, there's going to be a team out there looking for a power bat, first baseman, DH to add into your team. CJ Cron is just, it's tough, man, because you feel for him. CJ Cron got the extension, and CJ Cron has been great for the Rockies. 2 great seasons. But now, right now, he doesn't make sense. CJ Cron would have been wonderful to have just a couple seasons before, and you could have kept him around for a bit, and he would have been the perfect fit for the prior team. Now CJ Cron is at the point where he's not valuable enough to take away from Toglia and Montero. If Montero isn't getting in the game because the left side of the infield is still taken up pretty well, McMahon's playing well, Tovar's playing well, staying healthy, so McMahon's not sliding over as much, this has to be the place where Montero gets playing time. It is something that you absolutely have to have for the Rockies. But that comes at the risk of taking away your biggest power bat from last year. Now, I think Cron, honestly, I really do think too, for CJ Cron, I think he is going to benefit from a healthy Chris Bryant as well. We're going to see CJ Cron, we just like we did with Elias Diaz, we put too much on CJ Cron last year. We expected that just because CJ Cron was a good power hitter and was the only one really for the Rockies that was hitting home runs consistently, and the only Rockies player. Let me see. Let me make sure I get this right. Rocky stats and home runs for the team. Yeah, so Cron and McMahon are the only 2 people to cross into the 20 home run range. Grichuk was almost there at 19, Blackmon at 16, Rogers at 13. But when you're the guy that hits nearly 10 more home runs or 20 more home runs than your teammates, and you drive in, let's see, let's get the RBI total. When you drive in the most on the team and nearly and drive in more than over 20 runs batted in, higher than the next person on the list for the Rockies, CJ Cron's bat's too valuable to just take away right now. You can't do, I mean, the Rockies offense, the only reason the Rockies were generating runs in certain instances last year was because of CJ Cron. He is proven to be a good first baseman. This is another example as well of the Rockies having a solid veteran player in a position that is going to be better than people think. If CJ Cron isn't the only one expected to carry the burden of being the power bat like he was last year, he's going to be padded by having people like Chris Bryant in the lineup, where the both of them can then become a dynamic home run threat. The Rockies are a deeper and better offensive team if Chris Bryant and CJ Cron are in the game together, because that's giving the Rockies an ample opportunity from their power hitting teams or power hitting pairs. We didn't get to see any of that last year. And that's going to be crucial. And I think that's going to be big for Cron as well, because I think Cron was trying to do too much. I don't know necessarily if he was, but maybe when you just cool off like that, it's that's you wonder what happened with CJ Cron, because it was not sustainable throughout the year. And he's certainly cooled off. But I think there's enough in the tank to say right now, for at least the first half of the season, at least the first part of the season, maybe it changes. CJ Cron's your starter at first base, but let's face it, an unrestricted free agent next year. The future of first base is already been called up. You need that space. Should the Rockies really wait until the trade deadline to make a move on CJ Cron, or should they do something quicker if he gets off to a quick start this season? We'll talk about that and more coming up here in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Rockies podcast. But before we do that, got to tell you about our friends at FanDuel, the Midway Sportsbook. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to points scored, threes drained, all that good stuff. Maybe you want to get in on some futures of Major League Baseball. Maybe you want to bet on the Avalanche. Maybe you want to lump your bets together for a same game parlay. FanDuel lets you combine those bets for a bigger payout with those same game parlays. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Oh, I forgot my little overlay thing there. There it is. FanDuel Sportsbook. You can make every moment more. FanDuel.com/lockedon. See the little link there down below. Folks, want to thank you for making Locked On Rockies your first listen of the day. We're free and streaming on your favorite streaming service, and you can be part of the live chat, just like Luck says, Nicholas Delvo, Eric Harper, Soyboy, 2112. All are today. If you have your questions, you can get them answered live on the Locked On Rockies podcast. For your second listen of the day, why don't you go check out Locked On MLB Prospects, or the whole fleet of Colorado sports coverage. We got you covered with the Locked On Broncos, Locked On Avalanche, Locked On Nuggets, and Locked On Buffs podcasts, available for you Colorado sports nuts out there. All right, folks, we are talking first base. Our State of the Position series continues, and there's an interesting comment here. The one good move Jeff Bridich did was getting Cron, and this is an example. Yeah, credit where credit is due. The Rockies went out, saw a player with potential, and have been able to capitalize on it and handled the CJ Cron situation the right way. He's the right type of guy to give that extension to. CJ Cron earns himself an extension after last year, and Toglia isn't necessarily a slam dunk, ready to go. Here we are bona fide, ready to hand the keys over to you, because he's still got a little bit of time. I don't know how many more designations he has with the Rockies, because remember, he was playing he was still in the minors last year. He did get a 120 plate appearances with the Rockies in that time, and he wasn't overmatched as much as we could have seen more. But in Michael Toglia's time with the Rockies here in 111 at bats, 24 hits, 2 of them leaving the yard, 216 batting average, 12 RBIs, a stolen base, 275 OBP, slugging a 378, OPS of 653, and an OPS plus of 73. And mind you, that's only 111 at bats. But to just kind of emphasize how much the Rockies used and benefited from CJ Cron last year, he wasn't quite as good as, say, Ryan McMahon and Brendan Rodgers overall last year, but he finishes the year with a batting average. This is CJ Cron. Batting average of 257, 79 runs himself, 102 runs driven in, 315 OBP, a slugging of 468, an OPS of 783, and an OPS plus of 107, 29 home runs with 148 hits in that time. So whoever fills in for Cron, or if Cron, if Cron's playing DH and opening the floor to, they need to be ready to provide that thump. They need to be people. They need to generate offense. CJ Cron can't be kept out of the lineup if the young guys aren't coming up and hitting, if they're not performing, especially on offense. Because let's be real, the defensive side of first base isn't necessarily what we're worried about. We need people that can play a good enough first base, someone that can, an elite first baseman defensively does help you make some closer plays and make some of those bang plays and helps bails out some of your infielders, sure. But the main emphasis here, the big point for these players that are looking to take the spot or take the mantle over from CJ Cron is they got to produce on offense. So during this spring training thing, as we're watching players, we need to see how Toglia swings the bat this spring. We need to see how he does gearing up and getting ready for what should be the next step of the Rockies, because at the end of the day, the Rockies still need to be ready and still should move on from CJ Cron before the end of the season. CJ Cron is going to get you a decent bullpen arm back to help give you depth. CJ Cron is capable of getting you a late draft pick that you can just add into your repertoire. CJ Cron is good enough for you to get something back in return instead of him just walking in free agency, because CJ Cron's not dumb either, and he's seeing the future. He's seeing what's happening with the Rockies, and when your team has a prospect that's coming up that is already getting in the game, has already been taken away some playing time and getting it some action at the major league level last year, is going to get a lot of major league or get a lot of action this spring, and has a good chance of being on the roster to start the year, the Rockies aren't going to look to CJ Cron in 2024 and say, you're still the guy. The Rockies are most likely not going to extend CJ Cron yet again. I don't think you're going to get 4 years of CJ Cron at first base. So if you're CJ Cron and you're sitting here, I'm sure there might be discussions, but the whole time you're in the back of your head, you're kind of thinking you're going to walk. And what would be, I think, the beneficial thing for CJ Cron, instead of having to make him go through the process of free agency and things of that nature, is trade him to a contender, trade him to a team that needs him, and then that team can see, and that team gets the time. They get the experience instead of the what if, instead of taking the flyer, instead of the chance of, is he going to come from Coors Field after this season? Can he handle this switch? Do it in the season, so then that way that gives Cron an opportunity to play for his spot on another team. Because unfortunately, CJ Cron's going to have to compete with people. But what's great about CJ Cron is he can hit the ball. He can hit the ball well. When CJ Cron is locked in, he launches the ball. That dude hits the crap out of the baseball. Absolutely smokes the baseball. He's an asset. CJ Cron, just like Ryan McMahon, is a perfectly good option for multiple teams at first base. So why not fully lean into letting these kids play, letting your prospects play and getting it? We've said it for over and over again with the positions. If you're not going big and you have these potential players that you want to see more and more of, CJ Cron doesn't fit into the puzzle. At this point, CJ Cron is kind of the biggest outlier puzzle piece of the Rockies. We talked yesterday. The Rockies don't have someone immediately to slide in at second base. They can do it with McMahon, but I mean, again, we've seen how great McMahon is at third. Taking Ryan McMahon away from third base isn't necessarily just an easy thing to do just because we know Ryan McMahon's better, can play all these positions. He's better at third base. Brendan Rodgers has second base locked up, and like we just mentioned, we were just talking about him. Shortstop, it's Tovar, it's McMahon. But at first base, you got Montero, you got Toglia, you got Cron. And where does Nolan Jones fit into this whole thing? He's a player that I think we're going to have to dive in. Is he going to be in the mix at first base? Is he going to add more stuff? And then on top of that, how much time is Toglia planned for outfield? Here's the thing. I really don't want to see Michael Toglia play the outfield unless it's a way to get him to play, because I don't want the guy that's being told to me that's the next Todd Helton to be playing right field. Todd Helton didn't play right field. It's not what he did. He played 17 years at first base. I want Michael Toglia to play 17 years at first base. That's what I want for Michael Toglia. I don't want him out there shagging fly balls and right. I really don't. Outside of that being an avenue for him to play, if that's not the actual real deal plan for the Rockies, is to transfer and transform Toglia into an outfielder at this point, he should be getting the reps at first. And that also gets in the way of playing time for Montero. The trickle-down effect is real of where you're going to have these players play. So that's why I mean, Lux A says that's kind of asking a lot from Toglia at a young age. The Rockies are about to hand the keys over to their youngest, the guy that was their youngest player ever at shortstop. What's the difference? And what do you have to lose? I mean, truly, the Rockies lose nothing by letting their prospects play. They really don't. But at the same time, if the prospects aren't playing, in terms of the on-field composition, CJ Cron is one of your best, if not one of your best, potentially your best power option on the team, depending on how a healthy Chris Bryant really looks and things of that nature. CJ Cron is an important piece of the Rockies, but he's not so important and such a key piece that you build around, like I was talking about with Brendan Rodgers yesterday. And good question from the live chat, because that also relates to our conversation yesterday. We'll talk about that here coming up in segment number 3. Want to thank you for making Locked On Rockies your first listen of the day. We're free and streaming on your favorite streaming service. We're also live on YouTube, where you can get the Locked On Rockies podcast first and be part of the show. Bergen Yeti, I think is that. Do you trust the Rockies to make a good trade, though? And Rat King follows up with, why does this front office refuse to trade expiring contracts to let guys walk for nothing? That's a huge point there. So let's play some hypotheticals. CJ Cron, just like John Gray, just like Trevor Story, not traded, walks. You're not going to get the draft pick like you did with Trevor Story. And with John Gray, the Rockies just lost depth in their starting rotation for literally no reason. Instead of a good to great package that the Rockies could have put something together. I don't believe that teams were down on Story and Gray there. The Story, our injuries now coming to light are maybe something in hindsight, but certainly John Gray could have gotten some. And Trevor Story was playing at that time and was in the lineup at that time. He could have been traded. It doesn't help the Rockies to hold on to vets on expiring contracts that get in the way of your other players. Story there, they didn't really have, Tovar wasn't ready. Tovar wasn't up yet. There's a little bit there. And John Gray simply doesn't really make sense. Those two players didn't necessarily have prospects coming behind them to get in the way of them. So that makes their trade situations a little different. But why let players with trade value just walk. It makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't make any sense. There's just no reason. If you're the Rockies and you're not committing and you're sitting, because really, if you commit to CJ Cron and he plays the whole season and he starts and maybe he's an all-star again. Maybe he finishes with a similar line. Maybe he hits 30 home runs. Maybe he gets another 100 RBI season. Great. Does it truly matter if the Rockies are in 5th place in the NL West, outside of any sort of division hopes, and not even close for the wild card? No. All you did was have CJ Cron have a great season, and all of those at-bats were CJ. Let's see. So CJ Cron took 575 at-bats last season. That's 575 at-bats that you would take away from 2 of your biggest prospects. It's just not the move this year. It really isn't. CJ Cron is a good baseball player. CJ Cron, it can contribute. CJ Cron will contribute for the Rockies, and CJ Cron has been a solid addition for the Rockies. But not trading him when his trade stock was at an all-time high last year at the trade deadline and not trying to get something done at the deadline and move him this year would be a mistake, because CJ Cron has had good value, good trade value to go for, because it doesn't make any sense. We're talking about the hypothetical game. The Rockies are not in a better place playing Cron all year, him having a good season and him leaving in free agency. All we got out of it was having some fun watching CJ Cron on a team that was bad, and he took 500 at-bats away from Toglia and Montero. It just, in the big picture, in the grand scheme of things, why stick with CJ Cron longer than you need to in the beginning of the season? Because you need to let him raise that stock up a little bit as well. CJ Cron needs to play for the Rockies, and he needs to start the season off pretty well. But again, why hang on to an expiring contract, especially if you have an opportunity to move him if he has, and if he is successful and your team isn't in the hunt? On paper, if the Rockies hypothetically are somehow things are going right, and the Rockies are somehow fighting for a wild card spot, CJ Cron's going to play a massive role in that. He absolutely is. When it comes to the long ball, CJ Cron is the best option the Rockies have right now until we see what Chris Bryant can do at Coors Field. I cannot sit here and say that I'm confident Chris Bryant is going to hit more home runs than CJ Cron this year, because I got to make sure that Chris Bryant is going to play a lot. Chris Bryant maybe didn't play a lot at Coors, but he didn't leave the yard once at Coors. So until Chris Bryant demonstrates that he is supposed to be the big cog, as Bud Black called him, the Rockies will downgrade on offense with CJ Cron out of the lineup. So what overall is the state of first base? It's another spot where the Rockies kind of face themselves in a tricky situation, but a situation that they can make the most of. You can get the most out of CJ Cron, which will help your team, and that will help build up his value in the beginning of the year, and you can move on. Because again, just like the Rockies did in the second half of the season last year, embrace where you're at. They're never going to rebuild. They're never going to tank. That's fine. Whatever. It's all about the future at this point. And CJ Cron isn't the future. He's the present for the Rockies, but he's not the future. And how much do you want to just live in the present, live with this CJ Cron that most likely will get your team where it was last year? But if CJ Cron ends up doing what he did last year, and there's some Rockies players that outperform him on offense, that's a pretty good sign. Then that means Cron is contributing alongside others instead of Cron being the main contributor for run generation last year. I mean, it's a pretty big jump from Cron to Black. I mean, to have more than 20 RBIs than the next guy, that's a lot of RBI potential. That's a lot of RBI or a lot of run scoring that the Rockies would potentially move away from as well. So you have to be hesitant there for the Rockies and kind of look there. You also have to be hesitant with the way Cron's season panned out. CJ Cron is more valuable than people think. And CJ Cron is an interesting candidate, not only for trades, but for what his contributions will be for the Rockies. And I think still, so to start the year, it's his spot. But it's got to be Michael Toglia's spot sooner rather than later. It really does. At least a good split. But for now, the Rockies are going to go with CJ Cron. And CJ Cron in the lineup for the Rockies is going to make them a better offense. As constructed with the pieces the Rockies have, CJ Cron makes the Rockies a better offense. Is this the best? Is it the best move? Does it make the most sense? To win ball games right now, yeah, it does. I mean, CJ Cron being your starter is the better way to make you is the way to put your team in a better chance to win right at this moment. But is that, and for the Rockies, winning is part of the focus, absolutely. But is that more important than taking those at-bats away from Michael Toglia? I don't think it is. We'll see. We'll see what the Rockies do at first base. We'll see what happens with CJ Cron. We will see how that impacts Michael Toglia. But I think the Rockies are going to turn to Cron, and I think they will try to make a deal and get CJ Cron. They will try to trade CJ Cron, and then they will try to and from there it will be Toglia time. It will be Montero time. It will be whatever the Rockies want to do at first base. So let's see here. Adrian Ortega's back in the live chat, and he says, I'd like to trade Cron this offseason, being we have too many DH options. The spring could be interesting. I mean, the Rockies might try to do something, but they've said they're done making moves. They have the roster as set. I'm not quite sure they'll do something with Cron until closer to the deadline. I think that's really what it's going to be. I think they want to see what Cron is going to do, and I think that either is going to help or hurt them depending on how CJ Cron plays to start the season. Folks, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Rockies. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day. We're free and streaming on your favorite streaming service. We've covered the 4 infield positions. We're going to keep going around the diamond, keep talking about positions. We'll probably lump outfield together, but we'll break pitchers up into starters and bullpen. We'll talk catchers as well. I don't know what we'll do tomorrow. Probably catchers, just because to finish the theme, and we'll do pitchers and outfielders next week, just because the we can group all those together. But yeah, so we'll keep doing the state of position. We'll keep talking about things and gearing up for spring training as we have Rockies baseball this weekend. Spring training is officially underway this weekend. The Rockies will be playing baseball this weekend, and it is going to be exciting. We hope. All right. So yeah, folks, check us out. Free and streaming, favorite streaming service, Locked On Rockies YouTube channel. That's where you can be just like Adrian, Eric, Lux Ace, Nicholas, Rat King, Bergen Yeti, and more. There's so many people. The list of names is getting longer and longer to think that's in the live chat every day, which is wonderful as we're gearing up and getting ready for the 2023 season. We got you covered right here all season long on the Locked On Rockies podcast. Folks, this is Paul Holden saying so long from the Locked On Rockies podcast.